On this episode of Newt's World, Amelia Earhart was a pioneer in aviation. In 1928, publisher George Putnam picked Earhart to become the first woman to cross the Atlantic by plane as a passenger. When her flight landed in Wales, she became a media sensation and a symbol of what women could achieve. In 1932, she became the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic as a pilot. Her awards included the American Distinguished Flying Cross and the Cross of the French Legion of Honor. However, Earhart would not live to her 40th birthday. During an attempt at becoming the first woman to complete a circumnavigational flight of the globe in 1937, Earhart and her navigator, Fred Noonan, disappeared over the central Pacific Ocean near Howland Island. The two were last seen in Lae, New Guinea on July 2, 1937, on the last land stop before Howland Island and one of their final legs of their flight. Her disappearance remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. For 87 years, people have been trying to find her plane, a twin-engine Lockheed 10E Electra. Here to talk about the search for Earhart's plane and his recent discovery, I am really pleased to welcome my guest, Tony Romeo, CEO of Deep Sea Vision, a marine robotics company specializing in deep ocean exploration and survey. Tony, welcome, and thank you for joining me on Newt's World.
Thank you, Speaker. Appreciate that.
So, before we talk about your discovery, I just want to start by talking about Amelia Earhart. You have a great quote in the Wall Street Journal, quote, "For her to go missing was just unthinkable. Imagine Taylor Swift just disappearing today." I mean, Earhart really had a level of international fame that was astounding for that time period. Why was she so famous? I mean, can you talk about aviation and the role of this pioneering woman during the time that she was there?
Sure. That's a great question. I appreciate it. All the questions have been asked over the last couple of days. I think that's one of the best because this story is about her. She is America's favorite missing person, right? It's not Jimmy Hoffa, but he's famous too. But Amelia Earhart is our favorite missing person. And, you know, as long as she's missing, there's going to be someone out there looking for her. She came from a humble upbringing. She was a nurse in World War I in Toronto, and she just fell in love with flying. And she seemed like your just average, normal American, and she was tapped on the shoulder to do something great. And she ran with it. And to do what she did then, flying across the Atlantic, flying across the Pacific solo, and setting these speed records, distance records, flying records was just unheard of, and especially for women. And it's just so impressive what she did. There's a lot of people who wouldn't do what she did then. They wouldn't do it now. Certainly not with the technology that she used. Just a fascinating person. And by the way, you know, aviation pioneer, early advocate for women's rights, but also tremendous author. She wrote a book called For the Fun of It, one of the best books you've never heard of.
It's called For the Fun of It.
Yep. Terrific. She was so gracious. She was incredibly gracious. She never said anything bad about anyone. I mean, you knew when she didn't like somebody, but she never said anything bad. She was just so clever, so witty. She actually wrote 4 books. I feel like of all the things known about Amelia Earhart, that's one of the most unknown things. Tremendous author and just very intelligent woman.
As late as 1930, there were still only 200 female pilots. That it really had been a field that females had not been very accepted in. And so she was really outstanding as a pioneer at a time when it was very rare.
And here's another fact for you, Newt, that is very interesting, I think, is she was the first woman to cross the Atlantic, right, solo. But she was the first woman to fly across the Atlantic solo, but she was actually the second person. I mean, of course, you know, it was Charles Lindbergh was the first one, but she was the second one to do it. And there were no other men that did it. It was her. She was the second person to do it. So, and solo, by the way, I mean, just incredible thing to do.
I think now that we do it routinely in large passenger ships, we don't realize back then. But I mean, everything about whether the engine could work, whether you'd run out of fuel, whether your navigation was good enough. I mean, these were real pioneers and they were taking real risks. Now, it's interesting, though, because I think because she was so daring and because she was breaking these records, she really became sort of a symbol and attracted a lot more women into becoming pilots.
Totally agree. Absolutely, for sure. And not just into aviation. She encouraged women to break the barriers of all sorts of professions. And she called the cockpit, her kitchen, basically. She was encouraging women to get out there and pursue careers. And I think it was a wonderful message and it resonated.
Part of that process, she became a friend of Eleanor Roosevelt, the First Lady, who herself had really strongly advocated women's rights and women pursuing careers and women making a contribution. And she became the first woman vice president of the National Aeronautic Association, which actually kept the official records in races. And she convinced them to have separate female records because women did not have the money or planes to fairly compete against men for world titles. The other thing that you were talking about, she wrote, but in addition to writing, she also gave lectures all over the country. She was a person who was a star in her own right, and people came there. And I didn't know this, but she designed a whole line of women's clothing, dresses, blouses, pants, suits, hats, using her own sewing machine, her own dress form, her own seamstress. She modeled them for promotional things. And so people could actually sort of read her books, listen to her speech, and then wear her clothing. This was a cultural phenomenon.
That's right. And a luggage line. And they also had her at one point, I think, promoting cigarettes, which she absolutely hated because she didn't smoke.
You mentioned that she designed this line of lightweight canvas-covered plywood luggage. I didn't realize this. Earhart luggage was sold into the 1990s.
I didn't know that either. That's, wow, incredible.
Talk about lasting as an impact. And of course, she became a household name. People knew who she was. I was amazed. She broke the women's altitude record when she got to 14,000 feet. That's in 1922. And then, as you point out, 6 years later, she crosses the Atlantic in 20 hours and 40 minutes. I mean, again and again, she's just doing stuff that is remarkable. Did she have a close relationship with the aircraft manufacturers?
She did. With the Lockheed Martin folks, she did. They kind of specially designed the aircraft for her. It was Purdue University. You mentioned that she was a teacher and a professor. She actually was a teacher at Purdue University who, in large part, ended up buying and giving to her as a gift the aircraft, the Lockheed Martin Electra. So, yeah, she had a very close relationship with them and Gary Johnson. So, yeah, a very close relationship. And she knew most all the pilots and aircraft manufacturers at the time. I mean, she was obviously so well known. She knew the president. She was invited to numerous events with FDR. I mean, she was really a worldwide celebrity.
She goes coast to coast, setting a women's record. I didn't realize this. She flies from Honolulu to Oakland, which is a 2,400-mile trip. I mean, it's comparable to crossing the Atlantic.
Sure, yep.
And apparently that was also the first flight where a civilian aircraft carried a two-way radio. So here you have somebody who is a pioneer in technology, a pioneer in achievements, pioneer in women's roles in a variety of ways. She flew from Los Angeles to Mexico City. That took 13 hours back then with the equipment. That's a long time to stay awake.
And, funny part with that story, she was flying to Mexico City and somehow she got lost or she wasn't sure where she was at. And she just landed in this ranch land and got off. And there was a guy on a horse there. And she stopped and asked him how to get to Mexico City. And he told her, yeah, it's that way, just a little bit further. And she got back in the plane, took off to the guy's farm and finished the flight.
You can't quite imagine how really on the edge she was living. And when she began her worldwide flight around the world in 1937, she becomes the first person, man or woman, to fly from the Red Sea to India. That is a long flight. And it's the same thing you were talking about earlier with Mexico. I mean, here you are in an area. Nowadays, we have all of these electronic devices and there's sort of electronic highways in the sky. These folks are doing it the hard way, totally different. So from your perspective, when did you get interested in Amelia Earhart?
Oh, since I was a kid, I've always been fascinated with the story. My dad flew for Pan American for over 40 years, and my brother's a pilot in the Air Force. My other brother has his pilot's license. My sister has a pilot's license. I have my pilot's license. So it's been a story that's just always, from early age growing up, that we always talked about. It was just recently that, I really got deep into researching it and I said, why has this not been solved yet? All the information is there. And, as I dug deeper, it wasn't necessarily that people don't know where she went down. We all know generally the area. The problem was logistically how difficult and challenging it is to get to Howland Island. It's a very deep ocean out there in the Pacific. It's days away from anything else. So to mount an expedition, go out there and do a search is extremely expensive and it's challenging. There's only been 5 serious attempts at finding an airplane, deep ocean searches. David Jordan, one of the greats in the history of Amelia Earhart. He's done 3 of them. And Ted Waite of Gateway Computers, founded Gateway Computers, has done another one. And so it's not an easy thing to do. And so it's just, for us, it was, can we do this? Can we actually put this together? If I can get into it, my tactic on tackling this problem was not to do it as a lease, go out and lease equipment, but actually set up a business, Deep Sea Vision, where we buy the equipment and then we turn it into a larger kind of operation where we can use this equipment for other contracts and jobs out in the Pacific. And there's a backlog of work out there between pipe surveys, wind farm jobs, other wreck surveys. So if we could buy this equipment, we could bring the costs way down and then work in our Amelia Earhart searches and other projects. This isn't the only one. We're interested in World War II stuff. So for me, this was a perfect opportunity of switching careers out of real estate, get into something a little bit more adventurous and exciting.
How far is it from Howland Island to other larger places?
It's about 3 days away. I mean, the closest island is Kiribati. It's Kiribati, if you look at it, looks like, but it's pronounced Kiribati. There's another island that's Tuvalu. American Samoa is a couple days away. So it's really in the middle of nowhere. I mean, she was flying there. It's right on the equator. She was flying there as a stopping point on her next leg to Hawaii. She needed to refuel. So the U.S. Coast Guard had put some fuel there for her and built a runway actually for her so she could land and refuel and then take off and fly to Hawaii and finish off the trip.
When I was reading about your work, I was really surprised. I mean, if you get the Coast Guard to go all that way to build a runway and to bring aviation fuel, she was really getting significant support to try to help her succeed. That's a pretty big deal.
Oh, yeah. And I think the president was involved. FDR was involved on a few of the requests. They built a runway on Howland Island for her, especially for her to land there. And they had people stationed there for her, waiting for her arrival. And there was another ship halfway between Papua New Guinea and Howland, also trying to help her track her way to Howland Island. So there was a lot of support. It was a big deal. It was a worldwide event. I mean, it was an opportunity, I think, to showcase American innovativeness, American bravery. An American could fly around the world. An American woman could fly around the world. So, I mean, I think it was a great opportunity for the country to showcase a true American hero.
May also have been that having been personal friends with Eleanor Roosevelt didn't exactly hurt in getting the president to say to the Coast Guard, gee, wouldn't you like to go down to Howland Island?
She absolutely leveraged that. Yep.
Which is just kind of remarkable. Now, she leaves Miami on June 1st, 1937, in what is a planned program, which, given things like what they were doing at Howland, they must have really thought this through and planned it out as a round-the-world project.
Imagine that. Imagine doing something like that today, buying the tickets and figuring out your visas and everything. I mean, you're talking about a time when flying in some of these airports, you didn't even know what to expect. There were some countries that had required vaccinations. There were countries that were having malaria outbreaks. There were maps that didn't even have accurate roads and navigational guides for her. All of this was done through telegrams, right? They weren't texting each other and emailing and figuring this out. This is all telegrams. And a lot of people fault her for this communication plan and not being better on the radios. And I'm like, you can't do that. It's not fair. This is 1937. People weren't talking to each other on the radios back then between aircrafts. It was all in its infancy. She was breaking ground in so many different ways. It's incredible.
Strikes me that when she did go missing, people had this wide range of explanations of what happened. I remember one time there was a period where they thought maybe the Japanese had forced her down because she'd gotten near the islands that they were in charge of in the South Pacific. People were looking for all sorts of explanations. And I think for a long time, people thought, she might be found alive, even though during World War II, we were all over the region.
Right.
So the search itself, they had 9 vessels with 4,000 crew and 66 aircraft out there looking for her. It cost over $4 million, which back then was real money.
Yeah, it was the largest search and rescue operation of its time. And there's been a lot of debate on that number you just read out there. I mean, these are servicemen that were already in the military, already in the Navy. So, I mean, you add up their salaries and say, okay, it's $4 million search. But I mean, like, they could have been sitting at Pearl Harbor. A lot of these guys were pulled from Pearl Harbor to go out and do the search. They're still in the Navy. They're still getting paid. So to say that the money was spent for Amelia Earhart is not, I don't think that's, the efforts could have been done better on training, I guess you could say, but there probably were fuel costs that were used. But an enormous amount of resources were put into finding her. But I will say this, interesting thing that came out of the search was that our maps got better. And one of the things we've learned since she had the wrong map, Howland Island was plotted incorrectly on her map off by 6 miles. Some folks say that could have contributed to her, but by going out there, and the Navy learned a lot about the Pacific, about a lot of the islands. And, I think some of that was used in preparation for World War II.
What people need to realize is if you're off by 6 miles and you don't know which way, you're lost. It's not like, oh, let's just have a mid-course correction. Well, I noticed that a battleship which was going to go on a cruise for ROTC midshipmen, so they sent a battleship all the way down. They sent the aircraft carrier Lexington, which was one of the two biggest carriers we had at the time. And that particular carrier had 63 aircraft. I mean, they really went all out trying to see if they could find her. It gives you a sense of how famous she really was.
Yep.
So all of this has happened. She becomes very famous. And there's a great mystery here. Her husband, George Putnam, financed his own search until October of 1937. She was finally declared officially dead after being lost at sea. It's tragic, but then the searches start, and people have never given up, as you're an example. Tell us about you in a sense. I mean, you're out here, you have created this company, you're off doing something which has to be just totally absorbing you.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating adventure. It's start to finish, it's been 18 months or so. I mean, I thought this would be an easy thing to plan. And the more I got into it, the more I realized how complex this is. Organizing vessels and people and equipment, mobilizing to get out to a very remote area of the world has been extremely challenging.
Part of what makes it possible from your standpoint is that you have deep sea vision. Can you describe the company and what it does and what its unique strengths are?
So we have the latest AUV ever built. And an AUV is an autonomous underwater vehicle. And it's this red submarine looking thing. There's nobody inside of it. It's completely autonomous, unmanned. And it's called the Hugin 6000. It's built by Kongsberg. And what it does is it goes down 6,000 meters, almost all the way down to the full ocean depth, to the seafloor, about 50 meters off the seafloor. And what it does is basically mows the lawn. It just goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And it just scanning everything it's looking at using sound. And then it's recording all of that. And then it comes back to the surface. It's untethered. It's not connected to the ship. We're not seeing a real-time video of anything. And so for 36 hours, we don't know what it's looking at. We have no idea what it's seeing. It comes back up. We put it in the computer. And then we analyze all this data. I mean, it is an enormous amount of data. Imagine looking at, I don't know what Long Island is, but like the area of Long Island, 150 square miles, and picking through it to find one object that's 12 by 18 meters. And so our strength is we've got this deep water sonar. And then also I knew I would need the best talent to basically launch this. And I hired a guy named Craig Wallace who built the Hugin 6000 in Norway. And we ran into each other at a bar in Norway while I was out there training on the system. And he was just so excited and fell in love with the idea of finding Amelia Earhart. Worked for Kongsberg for almost 20 years. And I said, why don't you come with us and help us make this a success? And about a week later, it was done. He was on board. So it was having him along out there, and we specially modified the system so it could scan even wider. And we had a great team of guys. I mean, we came at this from a business perspective. Everything was about fine-tuning the cost, getting a fuel-efficient boat, because the fuel you're burning out there is not negligible, and having a small crew. So if things go wrong, you're not having to deal with a lot of problems. The formula was to maximize our time out there, scan the most area possible, and do this as smartly as possible so we could be successful.
One of the things that you use is synthetic aperture sonar. What is synthetic aperture sonar?
So it's this idea of stretching the array out. A normal side scan, you're just sending a ping and you're listening back, a ping and you're listening back, and it creates an image. A synthetic aperture sonar is you're sending a ping, numerous pings out, and as the submarine is traveling through the water, there's an antenna, basically is an array, and it's listening for the return sound. So it hits the wall, it hits the plane, and then it comes back, right? And you're creating an image. Well, what this does is it's ping A goes out, you're sending ping B, ping C, ping, and you're listening as the array, as the submarine is going through the water, the antenna is almost like making it longer and longer. So it's not actually that long, but based on where its starting point was and where it's listening, you've created a longer antenna, and you can therefore listen to more pings, and you can create a mesh of the sound and make a better image, basically, and you can look out further.
Is the ability to use that at the depth you were at a new capability?
SAS is a new thing within the last, I don't know, I'd say a decade. I'm not really sure. It is new. It's changed the game for sonar for sure.
What depth were you operating at?
About 5,000 meters, about 15,000 feet. Yeah, everything in the ocean is measured in meters.
Well, actually, it'll probably be about 16,000 feet.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
It's not as deep as the Mariana Trench, but it's deep.
It's deep. And for reference, yeah, about 4,500 feet deeper than the Titanic.
That's wild. So you're looking for something deeper and you're looking for a smaller thing.
That's right. Yeah, good, well put.
Yeah. So, and what you do is you just scan a grid back and forth.
That's it.
So how long were you scanning? How many weeks did it take?
We were out there about 3 months. We came about this mathematically and a little bit statistically, right? We divided the area we wanted to search into sectors, and we assigned probabilities to each of those sectors. And then we also assigned a difficulty level to each of those sectors based on the terrain that we knew was on the seafloor. And then once we could mesh those two together, we could say, well, we want to tackle the most equal probability stuff the fastest, even if it's equal probability, but it's harder to do because you have ravines and valleys. We'll save that for the end, but let's cover as much territory as we can if it's the same probability. And that was our approach. And I think it was a good one.
When you're doing that, did you find other stuff?
We didn't find a lot, to be honest with you. We got the question a few times. No shipwrecks, no other planes.
That's interesting.
Yeah, there's no shipping lanes out there.
I guess it was an area not many people went to.
Not a lot of people know this, but it was attacked. Howland Island was attacked, I believe, just a couple of days after Pearl Harbor. Just one of those weird quirks in history. We had colonized, and I use that word very loosely, but we had colonized the Line Islands, Howland Island, Baker Island, and Jarvis Island with, I think, 5 or 6 folks. I think that was our signal to Japan saying, hey, these are our islands out here. And Japan came by with some of their Zeros, some of their fighter planes, and strafed the island, killed a couple of Americans on the island, believe it or not.
Which is their way of saying, no, it's not.
It's not. That's right. Exactly.
In terms of your own background, which is fascinating, your dad was a pilot, as you pointed out earlier, for Pan Am. You and all of your siblings have pilot's licenses. So it must really be in the family.
That's right. We definitely were encouraged to fly. I was flying in high school when I was 14 or 15. My sister was teaching at the Air Force Academy, actually, and her husband was too. So I ended up going to the academy. Basically, right at the end, I decided I didn't want to fly. It was stressing me out. I like flying. Don't get me wrong. I have my license and I've flown a fair amount since I graduated, but it just wasn't. Being a professional or commercial pilot was just not my thing.
You went to the Air Force Academy and spent 6 years, a lot of it with an F-16 squadron. So you got a fair amount of flight time in.
Yeah, I did get a couple of flights F-16. That was a lot of fun.
You leave the service. You create a company. I'm assuming it's called Quickly. It's KWKLY. Did I guess right?
That's right. Yep.
And it's using mobile phones to connect home buyers with agents. And then the company, which now is Zillow, actually bought your startup.
That's right.
Classic entrepreneurship. And then you go all the way across the country, having grown up in Washington State, and you end up attending the Charleston School of Law and marrying your wife, Melissa Moss. I mean, you're in Mount Pleasant and North Charleston, which is a very nice area. I mean, it's a good quality of life. But then after COVID, you start thinking about something different, which is called magnet fishing. What is magnet fishing? So
it was an article I read in the Wall Street Journal. It's about, I had not heard anything about this. This is an activity that kind of got started during COVID, but it's basically you have a big magnet, powerful magnet, and you have a rope tied to it, and you just drop it off a bridge or pier or whatever, and you just drag it along the bottom of the ground, and you pull it up and you see what sticks to it. I mean, you get scissors and fishing gear, and some people pull in guns and safes. I mean, bicycles. I mean, all kinds of crazy stuff. And so our kids were not going to school, which wasn't long down here in South Carolina, by the way. They ended that pretty quickly. But I went to go out with my 5-year-old son, and this was like treasure hunting for him, right? I mean, it didn't matter. We were pulling up, a screwdriver. It was like cool. And so that got me thinking about what else is out here in the oceans that could be pulled up and that could be found. And that the idea of finding Amelia Earhart with magnets was like the original idea. But then I quickly realized this isn't practical, obviously. But, it got me thinking, like, why has this one not been solved? I mean, we're 87 years on. We've got the technology to find it. My brother made the comment that I think was very memorable. He said, this isn't going to last much longer. There's got maybe about 5 or 10 more years on this one, and somebody's going to find this.
So you decided, why not you?
Why not? And I was doing commercial real estate. So after law school, I got into commercial real estate. I like do these chapters in my life, the Air Force, tech stuff, then law, and then commercial real estate. So now we got the deep sea exploration. I like the different chapters. It's fun. and maybe one point get into policy. That's one of the things I'd follow in your footsteps, and I'm not sure what fashion, but I'd like to do that at some point.
You're sort of moving beyond the magnets, but you have the concept of underwater, and you end up dealing with a company in Norway. What takes you to Norway?
Kongsberg, the company that makes these equipments, the Hugin 6000, they're basically the gold standard in subsea equipment. They're basically the only ones. If you want a subsea submersible capable of going down 6,000 meters, you have to get it from them. And actually, when we bought it, funny story, it took 8 months just to have them release the equipment because it was such sensitive equipment. It's usually only sold to militaries. And so here is this guy, random guy from South Carolina. We were contacting the U.S. Embassy, folks that I knew in the Pentagon, and finally they released it on all this list of conditions. I mean, it just kind of threw them. It was like, this is not a common request for somebody to just come and randomly buy a deep sea submersible equipment. We had to go to Norway and do some training for about a month out there in the fjords, which was in December, which was super cold.
It's a pretty expensive piece of equipment, isn't it?
That's right. $9 million, yeah.
You were all in at this point. I have to ask you in passing, what's your wife's reaction?
Great question. Skeptical.
Maybe less so now that you may have actually found the plane.
Yeah.
So you take this remarkable modern technology, you go to the Pacific, you spend 3 months, and you find a reflection which looks like it has the same dimensions and shape of a Lockheed Electra, which is the plane that Earhart was flying. What was your reaction when you're sitting there looking at the screen and you suddenly see this?
I mean, it was surreal. It was right the last day of the expedition, and everyone was frustrated. And it was a moment of realization. For me, I remember sitting down. Some folks said a few words. We're producing a documentary. You'll have to watch the documentary to hear those words. I don't know what I can or can't say on the podcast, but it was one of those eureka moments. I remember thinking, this is the first time anybody's seen the plane. If this is it, this is the first time her plane has been seen in 86, 87 years. And it was incredible to know that there it was. It's not a ghost. It's not Bigfoot. It actually exists.
It's interesting that you feel that having 3 pilots thinking this through was actually an advantage over having people who are primarily mariners dealing with ocean events. What do you think was the advantage of being pilots?
I appreciate you asking that. We came about this with a pilot mindset. A lot of folks, they dissect her final 30 minutes and say, well, she would have done this nice, neat search grid and she would have done this and that. She thought she was out of gas. Every turn she made, she thought that was the last turn that she had. One comment that she makes at the very end is she's low on gas. It's one of the last things that she tells us. She's low on gas. And I can tell you, no pilot is going to admit they're low on gas. I can promise you that. Because when you tell people that, you just admitted you made the biggest mistake. You take off with enough gas. And you're saying, I'm low on gas. You're admitting a huge, huge mistake. And that's a huge clue for us because it tells us she's not low on gas. She's out of gas. She's basically out of gas. That's why she's selling. And there's been cases of commercial airliners that have gone into the ground because the pilots are too embarrassed to call the air traffic controller. They're holding for weather, and they're just too embarrassed to tell the air traffic controller that we're out of gas. And I mean, there's more than one time that's happened. And so for her to tell us that, and as a pilot, I mean, I immediately recognize she's saying she's low on gas. She's admitting a huge mistake here. And I think folks, not to disparage anybody who's come before us, but if you're in Mariner, you don't think about that low on gas. Well, I'm out of gas. Well, I just float for the rest of the time. No, that's a big problem being out of gas as a pilot. The other thing was the winds. You're coming into an airport. The first thing you want to know as a pilot is what's the wind speed? I need to know which direction to land. She did not know. She said she was flying 1,000 feet. She didn't know what the winds were at that surface. She couldn't communicate with the boat. And that's also something I don't think a lot of folks have keyed in on, which helped us with our analysis.
To that point, though, given the echo you're getting back, it looks like she landed well enough that the plane didn't break up.
That's right. We always believed that she landed softly on the surface and it didn't crack up. And I think that's a very reasonable conclusion. There's been other exact aircraft, Lockheed Electras, that have landed on the water and did not. It was structurally very strong. She was trying to fly from Hawaii to Howland. That was for her first attempt. And she crashed on takeoff. And the plane was actually still in good condition. And then, of course, she tried. And then she switched it around, decided to fly the other way around the world. And we all agreed that if this is a debris field, we're not going to find it. We had not tuned and filtered our sonar for small targets.
I'm very curious, Tony, what it is they had done with the Electra that made it unique and that enabled you to sort of check off that it was probably her plane.
There was a couple key characteristics. These twin vertical stabilizers in the back, that was very distinctive of her aircraft. There have been others that have been built that way, but this was very distinctive of hers. They don't really make planes that way anymore. The center of gravity is very far forward on the aircraft in relationship to the nose, and we see that with the sonar image. And thirdly, the dimensions of the plane are very similar, of the sonar image are very similar to what her aircraft was.
So what is your next step?
Yeah, to get out there and confirm it and then get all the interested parties involved. We've invited the Earhart family to come out with us, which they've agreed to and they're excited about. Anybody else that we feel has an interest in being a part of the confirmation and the verification, and then ultimately, I hope, the salvage of the plane. I mean, I'd like to bring it off and bring her home.
If you get it to the surface, does that set off a whole series of legal questions?
It absolutely does. It's a complex one. There's a lot of interested parties. The plane was not insured, and it was a private plane, so privately owned. That puts them in a certain category. The area that is found is going to make a difference. You know, how it's sitting in the sand actually also makes a difference. So these are things that we're going to have to kind of work through. We're going to expect to get all the interested parties together, and we'll sort it out.
When do you think you'll go back?
2024. You know, hopefully we can make an announcement on your podcast when we do.
If we can work out the details, we would love to talk to you at some point on the boat out there. That would be a great podcast. Wouldn't that be fun?
That would be.
It's sort of a report to the country.
Say what you want about Elon Musk, but he has changed the world with Starlink. I tell you what, when we were out there in Tuvalu, he's given Starlink to these islands out in the Pacific on the condition they go out and clean up the beaches and all the pollution, all the stuff that's garbage bin, and they come back every month. And if there's garbage and not taking care of the waste properly, he pulls the Starlink away from them. And that to me is just brilliant. And I love seeing that as a great example of a private sector solution.
Entrepreneurs actually solve problems.
Absolutely, 100%. It's this organic groundswell of absolutely, yep.
You know, and you might well entice a whole generation of young people to decide to become entrepreneurs.
I hope so.
You're doing fun things. When you get out there, let's plan a date and we'll do an interim report while you're out there and then another one after you get back. I think people will be fascinated by what you're doing and how you're doing it. You'll be in our prayers and you'll be in our best wishes. I think what you're doing is exactly what America is all about. You're going into the unknown. You're trying something that's a big risk, and you're using your mind and science and technology to solve something which has not been solved for almost 9 decades.
Thank you. Yeah, a lot of the inspiration is Amelia herself. She was the ultimate entrepreneur, innovator. We're making a documentary on this. It's called Why Not Us? Why Can't 5 Unknown Guys Solve Aviation's Greatest Mystery? You know, whether it's the plane or not, I hope it's inspiration for folks. There's this one thing you've always wanted to do. Go do it. If you're inspired, go do it.
Tony, I want to thank you for joining me on Newt's World. The explanation you're doing is fascinating. You are, frankly, a fascinating guy. I really hope that you have found her plane. I look forward to being part of talking with you as you go back. We look forward very much to continuing to brief our listeners about what you're doing. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Speaker. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
This modern world of science and invention is of particular interest to women, for the lives of women have been more affected by its new horizons than those of any other group. Profound and stirring as have been accomplishments in the remoter fields of pure research, it is in the home that the applications of scientific achievement have perhaps been most far-reaching, and it is through changing conditions there that women have become the greatest beneficiaries in the modern scheme. Science has released them from much of the age-old drudgery connected with the process of living. Candle dipping, weaving, and crude methods of manufacturing necessities are things of the past for an increasing majority. Today, light, heat, and power may be obtained by pushing buttons, and cunningly manufactured and appealing products of all the world are available at the housewife's door. Indeed, beyond that door she need not go, thanks to the miracles of modern communication and transportation. Not only has applied science decreased the toil in the home, but it has provided undreamed of economic opportunities for women. Today, millions of them are earning their living under conditions made possible only through a basically altered industrial system. Probably no scientific development is more startling than the effect of this new and growing economic independence upon women themselves. When the history of our times is written, it must record as supremely significant the physical, psychic, and social changes women have undergone in these exciting decades. The impetus of the sociological evolution of the last half-century should be largely credited to those who have toiled in laboratories and those who have translated into practical use the fruits of such labors. Among all the marvels of modern invention, that with which I am most concerned is, of course, air transportation. Flying is perhaps the most dramatic of recent scientific attainments. In the brief span of 30-odd years, the world has seen an inventor's dream, first materialized by the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk, become an everyday actuality. Perhaps I'm prejudiced, but to me it seems that no other phase of modern progress contrives to maintain such a brimming measure of romance and beauty coupled with utility as does aviation. Within itself, this industry embraces many of those scientific accomplishments which yesterday seemed fantastic impossibilities. Aviation, this young modern giant, exemplifies the possible relationship of women and the creations of science. Although women as yet have not taken full advantage of its use and benefits, air travel is as available to them as to men. As so often happens in introducing the new or changing the old, public acceptance depends peculiarly upon women's friendly attitude. In aviation, they are arbiters of whether or not their families shall fly, and as such are a potent influence. And lastly, there is a place within the industry itself for women who work. While still greatly outnumbered, they are finding more and more opportunities for employment in the ranks of this latest transportation medium. May I hope this movement will spread throughout all branches of applied science and industry, and that women may come to share with men the joy of doing. Those can appreciate rewards most who have helped create.
Thank you to my guest, Tony Romeo. You can learn more about deep sea vision on our show page at newtsworld.com. Newt's World is produced by Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. Our executive producer is Garnsey Sloan, and our researcher is Rachel Peterson. The artwork for the show was created by Steve Penley. Special thanks to the team at Gingrich 360. If you've been enjoying Newt's World, I hope you'll go to Apple Podcasts and both rate us with 5 stars and give us a review so others can learn what it's all about. Right now, listeners of Newt's World can sign up for my 3 free weekly columns at gingrich360.com/newsletter. I'm Newt Gingrich. This is Newt's World.